As to these charges, how do you plead?
Not guilty.
What makes you think we care? You're here because you're trouble and nobody likes trouble. Do you?
Do I like trouble?
You think this is funny? In 60 days, you're going to be fighting the Hun, and you think this is a big fat joke?
I don't think it's a
Don't
joke, sir.
interrupt
Sorry.
me and say sir when you do.
Yes, sir.
I just tell you not to interrupt me.
But I didn't interrupt, sir.
Are you mentally retarded, son?
No, sir. I'm just innocent. I'm innocent until proven guilty.
Says who?
Everyone, sir. The Bill of Rights, the
Yeah.
Declaration of Independence.
You believe all that crap?
Yes, sir. I'm a free citizen in a free country. I have certain
You
rights.
are nothing of the kind. You are a prisoner in my dock. So you stand here and you keep your mouth shut.
Yes, sir.
There are statistics available that say 1 in 10 Americans, that'd be 10%, those of you doing the math, owe the IRS money. So much money, in fact, that it totals out to about $131 billion as of 2018 in taxes, penalties, and in interest. 10% of the American people owe the IRS, or our government, $131 billion. Estimates of privately held firearms in the United States of America range from 393 million to 400 million. That's privately held, privately owned firearms. Each one of which, in theory at least, came with an FFL, Federal Firearms License, to sell that firearm and purchase that firearm. That's just two numbers I want you to keep in your head. $131 billion, 10% of Americans, and 393, let's just call it 400 million firearms. Just keep those numbers in the back of your head. We're going to come back to those. One of my favorite books of all time, a book that I have loved since I was in high school, is the book Catch-22, recently redone as a Hulu series starring George Clooney. And I don't want to spend too much time editorializing on it. It's watchable, but it's not, it's not as good as the original movie, which wasn't as good as the original book. It's an anti-war book. Don't get me wrong. It's an anti-war screed, I guess. But it is pretty funny, especially if you've ever had to deal with the U.S. government at any level. You will be bemused and frustrated by what you read there. But one of the scenes in the book, which unfortunately doesn't make it into the series, and I have no idea why, because it's a major point, is this idea of disappearing people. In fact, it's such a strange word. We're going to disappear that person. Specifically, Nurse Duckett comes to the main character, Yossarian, and says they're going to disappear Dunbar, who's one of the other pilots. Yossarian replies, "It doesn't make sense. It isn't even good grammar. What the hell does it mean to disappear someone?" Well, as it turns out, Dunbar was asking too many of the wrong questions. And one day, he was gone. He just disappeared, and no one knew what happened to him. And thus the verb to disappear someone came into our lexicon thanks to Joseph Heller in his book, Catch-22, which is the best catch there is, any way you look at it. In the past in our country, communication has been both extensive and, let's just face it, kind of a loose cannon. It's one of the things that I think appeals to the world when they look at America is the fact that we can talk about anything. We can talk about it loudly, longly, and with great expertise, even if we don't know anything. We have had newspapers. We've had pamphlets. We've had books. We've had, in modern times, radio and television. And at each particular point, particularly here in the United States of America, those particular forms of communication have been the Wild West, the frontier of freedom of speech. And in each particular era, there have been those who chose or wanted to, or at least tried to, suppress those forms of communications. They tried it against newspapers. The British tried it pre-Revolutionary War. Our own government tried it post-Revolutionary War, post-Constitution, the Alien and Sedition Acts of 1798. We have tried it at various times throughout our history. In 1917, we were throwing people in jail for writing newspaper articles about why we shouldn't be fighting in World War I. We've locked up people during World War II and during the Civil War. That censorship, however, those attempts at censorship, while they punished specific individuals, they never managed to actually censor what was being said. There was no way to make people shut up. There was no way to control them in such a way that their discussions had to stop. The censorship wasn't successful because ideas were still in people's minds, because the ideas were still there. And in fact, it sort of backfired because the censorship actually Streisand affected whatever it is that they were trying to censor, and ultimately, more people were talking about it. It had the opposite effect. But now we've hit the 21st century. Now we live in a different world. Newspapers are no longer our primary form of communication. You could argue that pamphlets don't even exist anymore, at least not in the sense that they did in the founding of our country. Books have become electronic, if they're read at all. Radio and TV are, I wouldn't call them dying mediums, but they are certainly not what they once were. The proliferation of television channels has made it so that no longer, I grew up in an era when you had 4 channels, ABC, CBS, NBC, and PBS, and that was it. Now, I don't even have cable TV anymore. Just have an antenna thing, and I still have too many channels. Can't make up my mind. I basically watch 2 channels, and I watch my morning news, watch baseball. That's pretty much it. But the proliferation of those channels has made it difficult to focus them in ways that we used to be able to do. Here in the 21st century, though, while the concept of censorship, while the concept of controlling these forms of communication is still alive and well, there are those who want to control what is said, who can say it, how they say it. It has changed in its methodology. We've added canceling, for lack of better phrase. Canceling is literally nothing more than censorship. That's all it is. The difference lies in the fact that whereas censorship didn't generally work, canceling seems to be, in my view, and this is my view, more effective. Why? Well, number one, it's a digital platform. So when you silence people, do you even know that they've gone? I have friends on Facebook, social media, and I read their posts, I laugh at their memes, and then I move on. And then a week later, I see a post that says, just got out of Facebook jail. Didn't even know they were in Facebook jail. How would I know? Were they, disappeared? And what if they never came back? How long would it take me to realize that, I haven't heard from that guy in a while? My erstwhile partner for Bubbleheads Steve, Brock, regularly posts, I just got out of Facebook jail again. I didn't even know you were gone. I had no idea. There's the shadow banning effect. How would you know if somebody had been shadow banned? Deplatforming of people. If that's a little more serious, we're just going to kick you off of things. We're going to say you can't use this. And that tends to be problematic because, again, it draws attention. Unless they just don't tell you that they did it. Like they did with the books on Amazon about transgenderism. They just deleted them. They didn't tell anybody, not even the author. They're just gone. They disappeared them. And nobody even noticed until someone went to try to buy one. You could pull what I call the parloring move, which is absolutely kick them off of the servers. In other words, get rid of the service in question, pull their ability to find a place to host what they're doing. That's one way to do it. But even more frightening to me right now, as a podcaster and as a broadcaster, is this idea that is being floated around by something called the Media Roundtable. Now, the Media Roundtable, for those of you who are not familiar with it, is a podcast. It's a podcast of media people who work for major media companies, and they have decided to launch an initiative that will vet podcasts for advertisers. In other words, this podcast, the Media Roundtable, which is a media podcast, will listen to your podcast and then tell advertisers, potential advertisers, whether or not they should advertise on your podcast, which isn't their podcast. Does that seem a little funky to anybody else? On a personal level, they can silence you on social media, disappear you, as it were. They can look at your life now. This is scary to me. Remember those numbers I gave you at the beginning? 10% of Americans owe the IRS back taxes, penalties, and fines. $131 billion is a lot of money. 10% of the population is, 40 million people roughly? I mean, between 35 and 40 million people. What's the odds of those, let's just call it 40 million. What's the odds of those 40 million people all being liberal Democrats? What's the odds on them all being conservative Republicans? Pretty low, meaning that if numbers hold and it's representative of things, it's probably, 40-40 and 20 of everybody else. Well, if you happen to be a conservative Republican, politically, who owes back taxes to the government, what happens when they knock on your door and say, fork over a couple $100,000 or come with us? What about those guns? 400 million. What happens when they're knocking on your door and they have a copy of your FFL and they say, you have this gun, you need to turn it in because it's now been outlawed. And if you don't, well, turn the gun over or come with us. Politics? What if you're, a sexist? What if you're a racist? What if you've said racial things on your social media in the past? And again, they've looked at your social media and they've said, this person, they're racist. We shouldn't give them a home loan. They shouldn't qualify for retirement. If they're military. There's a bill in Congress now to strip military retirement from those veterans who, quote unquote, insurrected on January 6th. Notice there hasn't been a trial won. There's not been a conviction. There's not been anything. And there's a bill in Congress to punish them. What about people who are, sons of Confederate veterans? They belong to a fraternal organization that celebrates their Confederate ancestors. I see here that your son wants to enroll in our college, but you are the son of a Confederate veteran. So we don't want those kind of people here. Extremism, as defined by the government's equal opportunity instructions, is an ideology that espouses supremacist causes, attempts to create illegal discrimination based on race, creed, color, ethnicity, national origin, sex, including gender identity, sexual orientation, or religion, advocates using force or violence or otherwise engages in efforts to deprive individuals of their civil rights. That's the military's definition of extremism now. So if you think that there are only two genders, according to the military, you are an extremist. And you are attempting, by other methods, to deprive people of their civil rights. And since you are doing that, what do we need to do with you? Definitions are an important part of the training that the military has gone through. But they also need to know how to report prohibited activity. They need to know how to tattle. That's what made up the majority of the training the Navy has gone through, including permissible and prohibited political activities, which theoretically haven't changed since I was in. Examples of unlawful participation in supremacist or extremist organizations, as well as permissible and recommended social media practices. They're watching you. They're watching you. And, well, to paraphrase someone a long time ago who questioned the need for atomic weapons, if you're going to have them, you're going to use them. If the government is going to collect all this information upon you, what are they going to do with it? Just store it in a computer somewhere or use it? There's a scene in the book Catch-22, and it actually is in both the video, the movie, and the series, where Yossarian is trying to get grounded by Dr. Nika. And he's asking Dr. Nika to ground him because he's crazy. I'm crazy. And if I'm crazy, you have to ground me. And that's what Dr. Nika says, yeah, you're right. I got to ground you. And well, then ground me. I can't, because you asked to be grounded. That proves you're not crazy. See, if you ask to be grounded, that proves you're not crazy. So you have to go fly your missions. Whereas if you don't ask to be grounded, that proves you're crazy, but you didn't ask to be grounded, so go fly your missions. And Yossarian lets out a low whistle. That's some catch, that Catch-22. Dr. Nika says, one of my favorite lines, it's the best there is. And if you've read the book, you know that Catch-22 is used over and over again to justify anything the Army wants to do. When the government is writing up the rules as it goes, how do you hold it accountable to anything? All those people who owe back taxes. What if there's a Catch-22 that says the government can do whatever they want to them? FFL records. They'll always win. Because they'll keep changing the rule. They'll use the Catch-22. It's the best there is. Which in essence says they can do whatever they want to do. And as long as they can do whatever they want to do, you're screwed. And that's kind of the point I fear that we've reached now, is we've reached the point of they have so much information on us, some of which we've given them willingly, some of which they've just taken, some of which they have abused their powers to get. But now that they know everything about you and me, and they've determined which behaviors are acceptable and which are not acceptable, it's a whole lot easier to shut people up, to disappear them now than it was before all this power existed. And when they come and knock on your door and say, "We're here for you," who's going to even know when you get disappeared?
or would be crazy to want to fly more missions and sane if he didn't. But if he's sane, then he has to fly them. If he flies them, then he's crazy, and so he doesn't have to. But if he doesn't want to, then he's sane, and so he has to.
That's some catch, that catch-22.
It's the best there is.